Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Using Disciplined Agile for Organizational Change Management Projects, presented by David Davis and George Armstrong. Dave Davis is a practitioner of and a recognized professional in project and program management, leadership, and business acumen. He possesses over 35 years experience as a manager, project manager, program manager, business analyst, and knowledge manager. Dave holds 3 master's degrees, including an MBA, a degree in e-business project management, and a graduate of the PMI Leadership Institute Master's Program. Dave has contributed to PMI in both service and content creation. He has published many articles and delivered presentations throughout the world, including the PMI Pulse of the Profession, PMI Benefits Realization Framework, and a subject matter expert in the PMI Global Conference Ask an Expert Kiosk. He is also the founder of the Western Lake Erie chapter, the founder of the Leadership Community of Practice, and a past member of the Management Advisory Group of the PMI Community of Practice, an active contributor to projectmanagement.com website. Dave was recognized as one of the top 25 influencers in 2019 with an influence score of 89 out of 100. His contributions include white papers, a semi-active blog, and multiple webinars. Dave is also part of the 2020 Standards Plus initiative and a Disciplined Agile chapter champion. Dave is currently a senior program manager for Ohio Healthcare, transforming the IT PMO to an IT strategic partner. He is also managing merger and acquisition projects. Prior to that, Dave worked for General Electric, focused on implementing the digital thread, combining IT and manufacturing within a program called Brilliant Factory. He is also chairman of the Judy Hug annual Christmas event and an active member of several other service organizations, including Mobile Meals, ALS One, SAVE, and Nightingale's Harvest. George is currently the change leader for an enterprise-wide ERP transformation at Ohio Health. Ohio Health is a network of 30,000 associates across 12 hospitals and 200 sites in a 47-county area in the state of Ohio. Ohio Health is one of the leading health provider networks in the U.S. Ohio Health is implementing the Workday ERP platform to include HR, payroll, finance, and supply chain functions. George has held many roles in change management with both external consulting and large Fortune 100 company experience. His experiences range from change practitioner, change capability build, creating and implementing internal change consulting models, as well as building and executing on change methodology and COE creation. In addition to his change management roles, George has also held many roles in both program and project management. George is on his 3rd Workday ERP implementation as a change leader. In addition to these large program type implementations, George has also served as Director of Change Management Consulting Services for a large Fortune 100 insurance carrier. In this role, he was accountable for oversight of a team of change practitioners providing frontline change support on large Tier 1 level strategic projects. In addition to the oversight, George defined internal change methodologies, supporting tools, as well as created and maintained a change center of excellence. George holds a PMP, Project Management Professional Certification, CCMP, Certified Change Management Professional Certification, as well as being certified by ProSki to deliver their catalog of change training courses. At this time, I will hand it over to the presenters.
Thank you. And George, if you want to quickly say hi so they get to hear your voice and we'll get
going. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Yep, and a little bit of Starsky and Hutch here. This is Dave Davis, and I'll be starting, and then halfway through we'll have a handover to George, and we'll start talking about a few things. But I did want to elaborate a little bit. First of all, I'm kind of embarrassed at how long that introduction was. Make sure that that's just sort of we have credentials to talk about you, but we are active learners. And that's the idea of this, is for us to learn with you. So I highly encourage you to put questions or whatever in the Q&A window. We'll get to those at the end. But, everybody's learning on this stuff, and there's lots of different things. So with that being said, let me start out with a little bit of a philosophy piece. The continuity gives us roots, change gives us branches that let us stretch and grow and reach new heights. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here, is all of us to stretch and grow and reach new heights. As a continuous learner, I have to be able to have these dialogues and these conversations with people that are also learning. And I always can learn something from somebody about something. So let me get into a little bit about why we're having this webinar. And I think I need to make sure that the proper expectations are set. We're talking about the use of Agile techniques in implementing organizational change management and using the DA process decision toolkit to help realize benefits. Now, with that, I want to back up and highlight a few things here specifically. We're going to talk about Agile techniques. So Disciplined Agile, as most of you know, and this does cover some Disciplined Agile, but it's not a Disciplined Agile webinar, is a structure that the Project Management Institute is rolling out for adoption of a toolkit to be able to help organizations realize the benefits of Agile. And it's important to use the term Disciplined Agile here because we're trying to look at it as different from a wild, wild west type of Agile, where there's lots of just different things going on that are a little bit fragmented. Disciplined Agile is a toolkit that helps to align a structure to decide what method of work or what way of work you should do for a particular iteration. So what we're going to focus on here is a little bit of how the structure is around Disciplined Agile. And then George will talk about how organizational change management, which is also a disciplined methodology, can work within this DA framework. So we're not trying to say this is the only way to do it. What we're trying to do is help you realize that there can be some dots connected between a PMO level approach, which Disciplined Agile could be argued that it is, and actual practices within organizational change management, and even a little bit of it to get that definition, because there's some I'll say there's a little bit of fragmentation on what exactly organizational change management is and how different organizations implement it. So, and by the way, anytime that's George, you want to chime in, feel free to. I know you've been in the OCM space a lot longer than I have, and I think you've encountered some of these issues that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so what I'll say is that there are, again, many approaches that one can use to do this work, and we're not necessarily advocating any one approach, but we're going to look at many different ways that we can use parts and pieces to accomplish the same goal.
Yep. And with that, by the way, if you notice on all my credentials and things there, I had a CDAI, which is Certified Disciplined Agile Instructor. So I've actually borrowed a slide or two from that deck. One of them was just get this idea that Disciplined Agile is really an overall, you use the term umbrella landscape of how to use these things. Disciplined Agile is very strong on getting to a point where you have process blocks, and then there's decision points within there, and then from those decision points you have different options that you select from, and then those options are actually in an organized list, etc. So that's Disciplined Agile at the 500,000 foot level. But it brings all these things together, and an organization chooses its way of work. So what we're going to look at is how does this way of work complement organizational change management, or how does organizational change management complement this way of work. So let me start with, at the highest level within Disciplined Agile, they have what they call the flex life cycle. And this is very strong aligned with lean methodologies and value streams and the whole realization of value for the organization. Fundamental concept at the high level is all value streams start and end with a customer. So as you look through it, and we're not going to go through this in detail, there's actually going to be, over the course of next year, you're going to have week-long workshops to understand this flex life cycle, et cetera, et cetera. But there's two big pieces here I kind of wanted to focus on. One is business direction. And there's a whole thing with funding the initiatives, et cetera, et cetera. But an initiative is no good if it's not adopted by people. So how do you make sure people are in a position to be able to adopt this and realize the value? So we're going to focus a little bit on how do we get from, the business direction to value realization, and with the people aspect of that. And yes, there's a real strong relationship between technology and people, et cetera. And that's kind of what we're trying to do is as we're going through an agile cycle, and by agile, it's really meaning more focused on iteration, delivering value, eliminating waste, those sorts of things, as opposed to a specific methodology such as Scrum or Kanban or test-driven development. So I want to set those expectations up front. And we're going to be looking at, like I said, this piece of, the business makes decisions not out of the blue. They have reasons why they make decisions and expectations they have for what they'll realize as value. And we need to make sure here at the other end that we're recognizing this value. So Disciplined Agile in and of itself is not just a product development for software. It's an organizational mindset to be able to deliver value. And it also even gets into helping the customer help us realize value, value for us, value for the customer. Within the DA mindset, they have three big areas known as principles, promises, and guidelines. And this is really here for a development team, as Disciplined Agile is initially being rolled out, more focused on a development team for an organization as opposed to extending clear through to the customer, but it's in there. And the principles are, just principles. As most of you are probably aware, more and more things are going principles-based. The PMBOK guide 7.0 is very much a principles-based approach. And what principles really are, it's driving forces. It's really what's our impetus behind this. We want to do this to provide value. We want to be good stewards of all the materials we have. And here this talks about some different principles. We're not going to go through this in detail, but we'll come back to one or two of them. But some of these delight customers. Yes, that's a great principle. So things we implement should be with delight customers in mind. Context counts, we'll talk about a little bit later. Be pragmatic. Do the right thing. We just aren't doing things for the sake of doing them. Organize around products and services, and that's actually a fairly new principle in the Disciplined Agile mindset. But it's still looking at different ways for everybody in the team is starting to think value and how is value achieved and defined. A lot of Agile type methodologies are really driven for conversations. It's making sure that the team understands what we're trying to do and be able to talk about it and maybe whiteboard out and paraphrase what somebody's saying. But it's really understanding that it's not just a product being developed, but we're providing a solution to some sort of situation. So with these principles, in order to make them happen to people, we make some promises. That you're going to be in an environment where you're psychologically safe. We will embrace diversity. We're going to accelerate value realization. All these promises is really where the organizational change management fits in. Promises we're making to people, both on our team and other major stakeholders, that you're safe, that we're going to work together. We're going to continually improve. We're going to hopefully we aren't going to fail fast, but we're going to succeed quickly. And I know some of those are cliches and et cetera, but this mindset does set the framework for where Disciplined Agile allows you to select your way of work based on your situation, your context, and what choices you have in order to implement it. And then finally, on the guidelines, that sort of gives us the rails, to keep the train on the track. That's the track. But it's important that we validate our learnings, that we utilize concepts such as design thinking. Nothing is a little silo. Everything has an impact, has a ripple effect. It's more the stone hitting the pond and the ripples going out than it is that specific little silo. Some of this foster joy. Those are things, and especially the last several months, organizations are realizing more and more, we need to give people that purpose and that sense of feeling, that sense of belonging. My purpose, I'm contributing to something a little bit bigger as part of a team than by an individual. Semi-autonomous self-organizing teams. Again, self-organized means the team has more control over how they're going to do things than being dictated by an authoritarian project manager. Guidelines are just that. It's going to help us to do it. We want to leverage and enhance our organizational assets. That means we want to be able to maximize, be good stewards of everything that we're entitled, that we're entrusted to utilize to deliver value for our customers and our key stakeholders. So with this mindset, we got principles. We believe in these principles that are things that are why we're here. We're going to make a promise to the people that you're going to be safe and you're going to be able to work within these principles. And then these guidelines are going to help us guide to make sure we're doing the right things. So with that in mind, I'm going to sort of jump back a little bit and get into a program management concept. And that has to do with benefits management. Those of you that aren't familiar, PMI has 3 layers of standards. They have project management standard, which is an individual project, a unique piece of work with defined beginning, defined end. That's definitely changed. We now have to know a little bit about the beginning and a lot more at the end. And there's a PMBOK guide standard for that. There's the program management standard, which is putting like groups of work together to be realized benefits. Then there's the portfolio level standard, which is they're intended to make sure that we have our investment decisions so we're doing the right thing. But within program benefits management, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because this isn't a PGMP, which, by the way, this is a standard for program management. But we're going to talk about how this plays in to making sure the organization is able to adopt whatever product we're developing. So we're going to identify the benefits. And then we get into the analysis planning. This gets into deriving what's going to happen, the metrics. How are we going to be able to know that we are realizing benefits? How can we measure it? And then we're going to be delivering it. And we're delivering it through components. And components can be projects. They can be other initiatives of what OCM may very well be one of the initiatives to help deliver benefit. It may be a series of training. It may just be a series of notifications and awareness that's delivered to different people. There can be lots of different parts in the benefits delivery, but in order to deliver those benefits, we need to make sure that the people that are going to be utilizing the product are aware of where this fits. And then projects should end, but benefits shouldn't. So how do you transition these benefits to make sure that the responsibility is there, the organization's tracking them? And then the last piece is sustaining the benefits. And that's overall performance monitoring. And that makes sure that we're within the tolerance level for where we're expecting to be. And also we're able to identify emergent benefits, new things that could happen. I just heard a story this week and heard the story. So with the world of the internet, and that some things are urban folklore, some things are not. I'll take this as real, but there was a place that decided that they were going to sell antiques and et cetera. So they started setting up a shop selling antiques. And they were kind of successful, not so successful. But then they decided that they'd sell some sandwiches while people were shopping, maybe get a little money on the side. And they started noticing people were buying more sandwiches than they were antiques. So that was an emerging benefit, right? We were planning on making our money with the antiques. We were starting to make money with the sandwiches. So they started maybe doing a few more sandwiches and less antiques. And from what I understand, that organization has now evolved to a company called Potbelly Sandwiches, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. But that's the idea of an emerging benefit. And we start with things, we find something new, and then we are able to track that new benefit that we weren't anticipating at the beginning. Now, I confess, that's maybe an extreme example, but it gives a visualization of what I'm trying to talk about. And then with DA, and so if you can follow me here, I just want to set the PM background, the project management background. Now I'll go into Disciplined Agile life cycles and workflows. And full confession here, public confession, I sometimes distinguish or have trouble distinguishing between Disciplined Agile and Digital Agile. I think the whole concept of digital transformation has melded into one thing in my brain. So bear with me if I make a typographical mistake like that. But within the DA, Disciplined Agile, there are a variety of what's called blades or processes on how things that are done. We already looked at that flex model that talks about the business identifying what they want to do and then realizing the value. There's different ways it can be done, and it's going to depend on lots of things of your organization itself, the maturity of it, the skill sets, etc. And that's where we're going to start to see how do we get this human component together with making these decisions based on decision options. But Flex is one. Agile is recognized as a blade, a way to be able to choose your way of work. And notice it doesn't say Scrum or Kanban, but those sorts of things they can apply. If you have an organization that has a well-defined methodology, you can incorporate it into your Disciplined Agile workflows. It's just a matter of making sure you have that mindset together and you're doing the right things in order to deliver value. So Lean's another example. The main difference between Lean and Agile is Agile may have more of a story backlog. Lean may have a well-defined body of stories that you're just working from as people become available. And then there's a few others with program and continuous delivery, et cetera. I think the textbook example, continuous delivery, Amazon.com supposedly updates very frequently in the matter of minutes. There's always an update going on. So that's continuous delivery. Let me move on to the next part, which takes Disciplined Agile and sort of breaks this out into these process blades within different disciplines. And again, this isn't a Disciplined Agile part, but if you look from the inside going out of these squares, you have DevOps type work. Disciplined Agile delivery is a very specific to Disciplined Agile and part of understanding that toolkit to move forward. But then there's probably things with security, things with data management, support. Notice we're getting some human pieces here. But then from outside of that, we look at different value streams, which is where we're talking about being able to make sure that business side where we're defining what the business is wanting to realize and the investment of dollars from the business and different components that all contribute to that within the overall Agile portfolio of work being done needs to be coordinated, interacted, and realized. And that's still where the PMO has a significant role. And that's why we say here, the PMO really starts to bring in some other pieces, such as some governance, where it is within the marketing, making aware of, some of the different major stakeholders are engaged, and that's called the different value streams. Value streams that are going to influence the products that are being delivered. Then it looks at the whole enterprise and different pieces within the enterprise. And I'm going to focus in on people management. Again, if we're developing a product and we want to take that product to production, we will need to have the people that will be using that product well aware of what to expect and what they need to do, what skills they need to have, what reinforcement in order to optimize the value, etc. And so that's brought in here within the enterprise. So Disciplined Agile lets you look at that. And I put this all on a foundation. I did the foundation last on purpose, just because this is going to, it's a foundation. Everything is going to depend on these different pieces being optimized, communicated, understood, etc. And that's probably the most important component here is based on all these foundations. How do we make sure we're doing the right work at the right point in time, doing different tools or processes, etc.? Disciplined Agile has in and of itself, if you remember way back, went through it pretty quickly with some processes. They have two that I'm going to focus on, which is context counts and choices good. What this means is when in a Disciplined Agile environment, when you're deciding what is my goal for my next iteration of work, you have a context. What's the situation? Where's my project at? Am I at the beginning of the project, middle of the project, end of the project in danger that we're trying to bring back to green, whatever? How's my organization? I mean, our project team works within an organization. Is it extremely mature or is it immature? Is it fragmented? Is it under new leadership? And therefore, there's a learning curve of what can be done, maybe what are the priorities of different people in there. And then the skill set. So the context has to do with where is this project at as I decide my next iteration? And then what is my goal? And here I chose a couple that were focused on organizational change management. But again, this is illustrative, and it could matter lots of different things. But are people aware that even anything's happening, or maybe what is happening? What are the barriers to adoption? Do I have advocates or adversaries? And if I have adversaries, how can I get them to maybe on the fence? The important thing is, what am I trying to do? And you heard George talk about earlier in his intro that he's done several Workday projects. Those of you not familiar with Workday, it's an enterprise-wide application that manages several things, including supply chain, people, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of people may not even be aware of that's going to be happening. Oh, you mean come 6 months from now, I may have to use a different approach in order to request a leave of absence? Just don't throw it over the fence at them. So what are the goals on that? And it can be in a thread with other development goals within a program that's delivering value. And then finally, with choices good, you're going to have a couple different choices for how to approach that going forward. And that's what I'm going to hand it over to now for George to talk about some of these different approaches that fit within the world of organizational change management. So with that being said, George, I'm going to jump to the next slide and hand it over to you.
Thanks, Dave. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to try to take all that information and talk about how we can use that Disciplined Agile sort of framework or approach and apply it to change management. So I want to give you a quick definition of what change management is, talk about how we define benefits, how do we set the right expectations for the work that needs to be done, and then maybe some challenges around an Agile toolkit. How do we right-size the change management effort for the size and scale of the project, and then touch on some retrospectives. So if we'll go to the next slide there. Dave, can you go to the next slide?
I thought I did. Did I jump one too many?
One more.
Okay.
There we go. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, high level, organizational change management is simply, it's that collective term for approaches that we use to prepare, support, and help not only individuals, but teams, organizations in achieving sustainable organizational change. By helping people go through the process of change means we're going to attempt to reduce the risk, and by doing that, hopefully achieving a higher chance of achieving the expected business benefit. Two concepts that are really important there, sustainable change and expected business benefit. When we talk about sustainable change, really it is once the program team or the project team disengages, has the organization done the right work to sustain the new way of working? And then when we talk about achieving expected business benefits, can we continue to work in the new way and continue to achieve those benefits long into the future? And that really is the focus of change management, really in those two statements. We're talking about the human element of a product life, basically. And in that process, we talk about needs elicitation, adoption, and operational support. And I want to break those down a little bit. When we talk about needs elicitation, what we're really talking about there is we're looking at what is the current state versus what is the proposed future state. And then more importantly, the next level is what is changing, who or what roles will be impacted by that change, and then most importantly, to what degree are these folks impacted? Ultimately, the collection of all this data will inform the depth and the breadth of the change management effort, all focused on driving adoption. And ultimately, adoption is what behaviors or skills that are needed need to be trained and mastered, and that's a key point, so that the organization can support the change going forward. And then operational support refers to things like organizational alignment, the ability of the organization to flex to meet the needs of, again, that new way of working so that the changes can be sustained. So in order to be successful, you need to determine the appropriate level of tools and techniques based on the size and the scope of the effort. So if you'll change the slide there, Dave. Much like Disciplined Agile or the world of Agile and program and project management, there are multiple approaches to change management. I listed some of the ones with a lot of visibility. So ProSci, Cotter, LaMarche, Northwestern, just to name a few, but there are probably hundreds of different approaches out there. Within each of these approaches, there are tools, assessments, they go on and on. Things like risk assessments, cultural assessments. There are templates that complement these approaches. And some examples of those would be things like sponsorship, engagement, communication plans, endless number of templates. And then types of networks that we use to support the change work. So things like sponsor coalition, change agent networks, super user groups, subject matter experts. When you boil all that down, really, these are all variations on the same theme. And when we talk about change management, we're really talking about these specific themes. Alignment, really, it can be leader and organizational alignment. Benefit recognition, awareness refers to the what and the why. Competency really refers to, are we training our folks to do the right thing in the right way, so they can adopt the new way of work, and then ultimately, are we sustaining that new way of work going forward? So next slide. What I wanted to try to do is give some examples of how we might apply a framework or decisions to understand what is the right level of change work that we need to do. So on the left, you'll see a basic waterfall or traditional way of managing a project. And what you'll notice there on the project side, they have the standard phases: planning, design, implementation, and closure. And there's lots of different names. Those are just the ones that I happen to use. And when we think about the change management piece of that, there are some specific phases that we go through: assessment, strategizing, planning, executing, and sustaining. Now, this method or this way of doing the change work really provides for more planning and execution time. the change work will basically follow the schedule of the program or the project, and it's more predictable, and it lends itself to the traditional format of planning and executing the change work. On the right side of this visual, you'll see that we are sort of in an agile type environment. We're looking at various sprints, and in order to be able to do the change work in this type of environment, some changes need to be made. And those are things like we have to align to an agile approach from a change perspective. We have to focus on activities that drive value. We have to increase the speed of our delivery. We don't have, unlike the left where we have lots of time to do this, we have to do this in a rapid approach. We have to ensure client satisfaction, and we have to optimize efficiency and flexibility. And what that really means is, in an agile type environment, the importance of a disciplined approach is critical to this type of change delivery. Iteration goals and deliverables are a must. The change tactics and tasks must be concise and repeatable as possible. You have much less time to create the impact. So a disciplined approach or a decision framework could be the difference between increased levels of awareness and the adoption and realization. So I'm trying to think, how can I build a decisions tree really just to show what I'm talking about, and how do we understand what are the proper tools for the goals of an iteration?
Yeah. Hey, George, before we jump to the next slide, I want to just take 1 minute, take more than a second here.
Sure.
Then one of the other pieces of this is if you're doing product demos with each iteration, you want to have your change management person there. So they're able to contribute back to how do we need to influence this change, adoption, and et cetera. So there's really an extension of that development outside of an IT development team and really able to adoption. And so that's one of the critical parts is bringing in the stakeholders that are also helping to drive this understanding of the change. Okay. So when you have these little arrows here, everyone's also a critical, I won't even say, it's not a handoff, it's critical knowledge share that will help you do better. Okay.
Exactly. So the next slide really is we're looking at one of the red arrows in that last slide. So in this example, let's say, for instance, this project is developing an application with some user functionality. And for this particular iteration, the goal for change management is to demonstrate the new application functionality, seek user feedback, and gain sign-off on that feedback. And so you have, in change management, you have various actions you can choose from. Things like sponsorship, awareness, engagement, communication training. There are other things like adoption and sustainment. But for this purpose, I just chose these 4 or 5 categories. So you can create a decision tree on what is the right tool that is going to help me get what I need out of this particular iteration, and we're going to meet these iteration goals. So for instance, some LCM tactics that are available for sponsorship might be things like leadership action plans or leadership coaching. Around the awareness piece, there might be manager toolkits or website updates or direct targeted communication. For engagement or readiness, it might be things like a roadshow or an application demo. Under communication, it could be an iteration retrospective, town hall meetings. For training, you would have things like just-in-time training or LMS courses or demos and in-person training. Now, there are a host of lots of different tactics. I just chose a few of these to prove the point. So for instance, we keep this iteration goal in mind. What I chose out of this list were things like I need leadership action plans, I want to have communication, application demo, iteration retrospective, and town hall. So what I'm doing is I'm planning my OCM iteration, I'm creating my iteration plan that is repeatable for each of the iterations in the functionality development phases. So for instance, what I would do here is I would create a targeted communication that would come from one of the leaders to all of the key stakeholders who have some buy-in into this application. We would then say in that communication, we're going to be hosting a town hall meeting wherein you will be seeing a demo of this application, and we're going to be having a retrospective to get your feedback and your sign-off on what's been developed in this particular sprint. And the idea is through these particular targeted actions, we'll get the involvement and engagement of the key stakeholders to say, yes, this is what I need, or no, it won't work for me. But more importantly, why won't it work? And maybe what else maybe were you expecting? So the intent here is to put a framework around making decisions about what are the key tactics and to create a plan that is repeatable for each of these specific sprints. And so I wanted to give you sort of an instance. This is how we can use the Disciplined Agile or framework approach to help us choose the right tools that focus on the right people at this given point in the timeline of the project. So next slide. So I want to move on to the benefits piece. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I get asked a lot about how does change management play into program and project management, and how does it drive value? And what I try to describe really is it's a couple parts. The project team or the program team provides or builds the capability. It might be a process change or technology or maybe even a reorganization, whatever it might be. The project team brings that capability to the table. The change team is really responsible for building the competency, meaning the training, the adoption, the understanding of whatever it is the capability is being built. And those two together really drive that business value or the realization through adoption and sustaining the change. That is where you're going to get that business value. Next slide. So as Dave mentioned to you, obviously there's a formal way of program benefits management. From a change perspective, though, I wanted to point out a couple of things. Obviously, the benefits have to be defined by the business. Hopefully, it's coming from a business case. These are agreed upon by executive sponsors, and they're actually owned by the program and project team. One of the ways we would prefer from the project team is a framework or a decision framework that helps us understand a roadmap for achieving these benefits, meaning when will these benefits be achieved, or when are they expected to be achieved? How will they be achieved specifically, so that we can tailor the behavior and the training to that work? And then how are they going to be tracked and measured? So from a change perspective, we're looking to that program, to partner with that program and project team to create a framework around benefits realization specifically. From an ROI perspective, really, there is a change management ROI, but it really is that part of the project ROI that is dependent upon the behavior or process changes that really boils down to successful adoption and sustaining those changes. So you can actually calculate a change ROI, but it is based on what that program ROI is, and again, it's that people component of the change piece. And then one more slide. So I thought about how else can we apply a framework mentality or disciplined agile sort of mindset to the rest of the change work. And so what you're seeing here are, again, various pieces of the change work that we might be doing in any given project. So there's sponsorship, functionality, validation, engagement, communication, training, adoption, sustainability. These are all, how are we going to measure these and how effective are they going to be? We can build a framework around each one of these that outlines what support and actions are needed from the business to support the change effort, and it will provide understanding and set those expectations with the business around what is the work that we're going to do and how do they play a part in that. A disciplined approach to creating a framework for the business and the amount of support involved will dictate really the potential outcomes or the benefits. So an example here, let's talk about sponsorship, for instance. We want to know certain things. What is the size of this effort? Is it going to affect maybe a business unit or one of several companies, or is it going to be regional? Is it going to be domestic? Is it going to be international or global? So again, setting that framework and setting those questions to understand, in this case, how large the effort is, will then start driving some of the decisions around the type of sponsorship that I need, the location of these sponsors, the level of influence that these sponsors would have over the particular effort being delivered. And more importantly, what is it I'm going to ask of these sponsors to do, given the scope and the nature of the project? So this is just to basically show that we can put that disciplined approach around, a framework of questions to help us weed out and determine what are the right tools and to what degree do we need to do this work in order to be successful. And then finally, the next slide really talks about retrospectives. And really, we're not talking about a product iteration, we're really talking about a change iteration. So as we go through the life of an effort from a change perspective, we want to continually go back to our frontline folks and the people who are being impacted by whatever it is we're delivering. And we want to ask their input. We want to know through customer surveys, through random emails that surveys attached. We want to know if they have questions. We want to know what we can improve, what we should keep doing or stop doing. And we want to do that on a consistent basis. So we're getting that feedback and input from those customers so that we are people focused on what we're doing. You'll notice it's got some of the same techniques for an agile software development iteration, but these are focused on individuals and the people side of things. But one thing that's really important to take away here is that a lot of times, we ask for information and we just sort of put it away in a document. What's really important is that we take that information and we use it to make decisions on really what is next. How do we take that information and make decisions about the next step? So when we think about an iteration, the feedback we get can inform what we do in the next iteration to make it better, to create efficiencies, whatever that might be. Again, the key there is to not throw it away, but simply to use the information. Okay, so hopefully I've given you some insight to how we can use a disciplined approach or framework or decision trees to help us understand the type of work we can do in the change space. So I'll turn it back over to Dave.
Yeah, and George, I want to stay on this slide for a minute.
Yep.
What we're talking about here is integration. That change management or OCM isn't just something off in another hemisphere that every now and then we reach out and say, hey, by the way, it's integrated, that we can get some huge economies of scale by having some discipline around how we bring the change management skills in at the right point, what tools we select, and that we can do some of these things in parallel instead of a serial handoff. So it's really the conversations and the challenges to organization to be able to bring in that adoption human element into the product development cycle. And, so people know, George and I have been talking for a long time on some of this stuff. Can you have a story for change management? And the answer is yes, but where does that story fit?
Right.
And, I guess we could go through several different pieces on that, but the important part here is that we have that linkage, that we can all be working together and have change management as a part of our overall DA decision toolkit. Or it could even be that you could maybe somewhat combine a way of work where there's focus maybe on something with preparation for production with some change management task. That's very acceptable. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here with then we'll do some questions. The summary, DA is a decision toolkit. Its whole purpose is to help you decide your right way of work. And as I was just talking about, the right way of work can include product development and organizational change management. As I said way back at the beginning, that we weren't going to prescribe how to put these two together, but I offer it as a challenge to your organization on how can you make sure that through your iterative life cycle changes that you have the human element taken into consideration. So the value drivers, they're the same for regardless of your type of project. And you can have, and probably a lot of you have been involved in whole scale change management projects. And it has nothing to do with any development of a product, but it maybe has to do with implementing a third-party product. And I would offer as an example, any of you groups that have integrated Salesforce. And you're not really doing much software development there. You're implementing a tool into the heart of your processes. Actually, you're making it your central nervous system in a lot of ways. And so a lot of that has to do with how do we, the people, understand where this fits in and adopt it. And then also the benefit and the value realization. We're sort of digressing a little bit from the PMI program manager by putting that /value, because they're not always necessarily the same, but they are strongly related, and they do both fit together. And regardless of the type of project, you're delivering benefits, you're realizing value, and you need to make sure that you understand that. And the mindset is there that people understand what is the benefit of this tool. You know, there's an old cliche I learned back when I took a marketing class in college about we don't sell the steak, we sell the sizzle. Well, part of this with the OCM is making people realize what's causing this sizzle. You know, we get their interest. Now, this is what's going to deliver on it. And DA allows us to be able to incorporate these things. And then toolkit, define your way of work, and different things for different parts of an OCM cycle. I mean, you could be well beyond an awareness cycle and into a truly adoption cycle. If I go back to Workday as an example, how do I apply for FMLA? We got to make sure they're trained on how to be able to do those things or access to resources in order to meet that need when it comes up. Because we go back to the sustainability, you know, I may not need FMLA until 18 months after you've implemented Workday. And I certainly am going to remember a training class on how to do it, but I need to have resources to be able to go back to support that. And then adoption is a very valid component of any product service value stream. Talked about before the flex model, value streams begin and end with customers. One of the customers of our products we're delivering are probably the internal people that are using that product in order to deliver another product or service to green dollar paying customers. And then the change management principles, regardless of that plethora of methodologies, do support DA work efforts, defining the goal and what's the best method to achieve the objectives. And if you remember correctly, when we talked back before about context and choice, context could be very much the culture that you're in. You may be in a culture that is very comfortable with that ProSci model, so that would drive a lot of things. But you may be another one that's very new to this whole thing, and that may not be the best choice. There's several other ones that may be the best choice. And what we wanted to do today was to get you, plant that seed, that thought on how can we make sure that this can integrate. And guess what? The DA toolkit does give us that framework in order to make it happen. How do we make it happen? That's how you choose your way of work, and et cetera. It's a journey. Hopefully we planted some seeds for thought, and we'll go from there. I don't know, George, if you have anything to add here.
No, just that there are a couple of questions in the inbox.
Okay.
So the first one, how do you adopt Agile in your business with limited technology resources?
Well, that's an it depends.
Yeah.
And that could be a whole. I guess the first thing is start somewhere. That's one of the things Disciplined Agile does talk about. And I'd recommend here a very pragmatic approach. If you're a member of PMI, for the time being, they're actually offering as a benefit to PMI members the ability to download a book called Disciplined Agile Way of Wow, but that's kind of like the definitive source and definition of where it is. I'd recommend downloading that, reading it, but you're going to need to make the start somewhere. A lot of times people start small and build big, but what's the tolerance to Agile in the organization? Is there an education thing you need to do to key stakeholders to even to get buy-in to that? But I would say try to find a feature. Start small on a feature and get some stories around and get active involvement from your major stakeholders and your sustainability as your adoption later on, and just start to deliver. Because you're going to learn, and no matter what you're doing today, the odds are good it'll be different in 6 weeks or even 6 months, but definitely within 6 years.
So the next question is how to take advantage of retrospectives in terms of addressing mistakes without creating an atmosphere of blame. And so one of the things when we have a retrospective, we clearly lay out sort of the guidelines and the guardrails, if you will, that those of you who are in this room to talk about this product and talk about the delivery, we're looking for that open and honest feedback. It's not about what someone did or didn't do. It's about making the best possible product. And so we try to answer your question, we try to set those boundaries as before we even start that session. So that tends to work pretty well. The next question, Dave, all projects are for implementing change, but after defining a project, the business case, which you address from an organizational benefit. I'm not sure what that question's asking. That might just be more of a statement.
All projects. Actually, Jerry has a couple things here I think kind of lumped together. And I concur with what you're saying, Jerry, because he also has one, a project actually ends with the product of the products produced and accepted, not when its results provide benefits. That's not always the case. There's a lot of organizations that have a, quote, warranty period, unquote, at the end of the project being done and being transitioned to operations. One of the things the program management standard tries to address with that is they have an entire suite of tools, techniques, et cetera, on transition to operations. So we